When people think about arguments, they often imagine them as battles of logic, contests of evidence, or competitions of rhetorical skill. And while these things matter, the truth is that the majority of arguments are won or lost before a single word is even spoken, because the real foundation of persuasion lies in emotional control. If you cannot govern yourself, you cannot govern the direction of the conversation. Emotional discipline is the very first battleground, and without it, no amount of clever reasoning will save you. Think about it. When tempers flare, clarity evaporates. Anger does not sharpen the mind, it clouds it. Frustration doesn't make your words more convincing, it makes them sloppy. A raised voice may feel powerful in the moment, but in reality, it signals weakness, because it shows you have already been provoked beyond the point of self-mastery. To win an argument, you must resist the most primal temptation, the urge to lash out. And that requires cultivating the kind of calm presence that allows you to stand firm when the other person is trying to shake you. Self-control is not passive, it is not silence or suppression, it is active, deliberate composure. Imagine two people in conflict. One is shouting, defensive, desperate to prove their point. The other is calm, steady, and unshaken. Who do you think the audience, whether a group of onlookers or even the other person themselves, will find more credible? Authority flows from, if you remain calm when others cannot, you are already winning, because you have positioned yourself as the rational center in a storm of emotion. But why is this so difficult? Because arguments touch the ego, and the ego is fragile. We don't just argue about ideas, we argue as if our very identity is on trial. To be contradicted feels like being diminished. That's why the instinct to defend, to shout back, to win at all costs rises so quickly. Yet this instinct is precisely what sabotages you. The more you allow ego to dictate your tone, the less persuasive you become. People don't admire the one who loses control. They admire the one who holds the line, who can respond with reason even when provoked. One way to practice emotional control in arguments is to delay your response. Do not rush to fill the silence the moment you are challenged. Pause, take a breath. Let the weight of the other person's words settle before you answer. This pause does several things. It prevents you from reacting impulsively. It signals to the other person that you are considering their point seriously, and it gives you time to craft a more measured response. That single breath can be the difference between escalating into chaos and maintaining control of the dialogue. Another method is to reframe the argument not as a personal attack, but as an exploration. When someone disagrees with you, remind yourself, this is not a threat to my identity. This is a challenge to my ideas. That subtle shift protects you from taking things personally, and once you stop taking it personally, you gain the ability to engage more rationally. Emotional distance does not mean apathy. It means the freedom to think clearly. Consider how this principle applies not only in debates, but in every sphere of life, at work, in relationships, even in politics. A leader who panics in crisis loses the trust of their followers. A parent who erupts in anger loses moral authority in the eyes of their child. A thinker who argues with hostility undermines the very validity of their reasoning. Control is not about suppressing emotion altogether. It is about directing it with intention. Calmness is not weakness, it is power under control. Someone might object, but isn't passion persuasive? Don't strong emotions convince people more than cold logic? And yes, passion has its place, but passion without discipline is just noise. The most compelling speakers in history, those who could move nations, with their words, were not swept away by their own emotion. They channeled it deliberately with precision. They knew when to raise their voice and when to soften it. They knew when to let silence speak louder than words. Their emotions served their reasoning. They did not dominate it. No, in this sense, controlling your emotions is not about suppressing your humanity. It is about ordering it. It is about placing reason in the driver's seat while letting emotion be the fuel, not the steering wheel. Imagine trying to drive a car where the accelerator is stuck and the steering wheel is ignored. You will crash no matter how powerful the engine is. Emotion is energy, but unless it is directed, it will destroy rather than build. When you remain calm in argument, something else powerful happens. You force the other person to reveal themselves. If they grow angrier while you stay composed, they begin to look unreasonable. If they exaggerate while you remain factual, they appear less credible. Your calmness doesn't just protect you, it magnifies their flaws. In this way, control of your emotions isn't just defense, it's offense. It makes the battlefield uneven in your favor without you even having to raise your voice. So the first rule of winning an argument is not to master the facts, not to memorize clever comebacks, but to master yourself. Because arguments are rarely contests of information, they are contests of perception. The one who appears rational, collected, and grounded is the one others trust. And trust, more than volume or aggression, is the true measure of victory. If you cannot control your emotions, you become a slave to them, and a slave cannot win. But if you master your emotions, you become unshakable, and an unshakable person is impossible to defeat in argument. But when most people enter an argument, they come armed like a soldier heading to war. They've already rehearsed their counterpoints, sharpened their comebacks, and prepared themselves to fire words like ammunition. But the irony is this: in their eagerness to speak, they stop listening. They aren't trying to understand the other person, they're simply waiting for their turn to respond. And that mistake cost them the argument before it even begins. True listening is not passive. It is not sitting quietly while you load your mental weapon for the next attack. True listening is active. It is leaning in, giving your full attention, and trying to step into the other person's frame of thought. It requires humility, because to listen properly means admitting, if only for a moment, that the other person might have something worth considering. That humility is rare, but it is also powerful, because it creates a foundation of credibility that most people ignore. Think about how it feels when someone genuinely listens to you. When you sense they aren't just nodding politely, but are actually taking your words seriously. Doesn't that make you more open to them? Doesn't it soften your resistance, even if you still disagree? Now reverse the perspective. When you truly listen to your opponent in an argument, you lower their defenses. You make it harder for them to paint you as an enemy. Instead, you become someone they can respect, even if grudgingly, and respect is half the battle in persuasion. Listening does something even more strategic. It gives you information. Every word the other person speaks is data, a clue about their assumptions, their fears, their priorities, and their blind spots. If you're too busy rehearsing your rebuttal, you'll miss it. But if you listen carefully, you'll often discover the exact key to unlock their reasoning. Arguments are not about bombarding the other person with everything you know. They are about finding the one point of leverage that makes your position undeniable. And you can only find that point by listening. Consider a lawyer in a courtroom. The best lawyers don't just deliver grand speeches, they listen with precision during testimony. They watch for slips, contradictions, and hidden admissions. They know that listening reveals openings that aggressive speaking cannot. In everyday arguments, the same principle applies. If you truly understand your opponent's worldview, you can respond in a way that speaks directly to it. Instead of shouting louder, you aim sharper, but listening isn't only about strategy, it's also about respect. When you listen, you acknowledge that the other person is a human being with thoughts, feelings, and dignity. You don't have to agree with them, but you do have to honor their right to speak. And paradoxically, this respect makes your words stronger. Why? Because people are far more likely to consider your perspective when they feel that you have considered theirs. Persuasion is rarely a one-way street. It is almost always reciprocal. There's also a psychological trick hidden in listening. People reveal themselves when they feel heard. If you let someone speak freely, they will often over-explain. In their eagerness to be understood, they will sometimes expose contradictions in their own reasoning without you ever needing to point them out. Your silence can be more powerful than your words because it draws them out. It allows them to tie their own knots while you stand calmly watching and waiting. Of course, listening is harder than it sounds. It requires patience in a culture that rewards quick replies and clever retorts. It requires focus in a world addicted to distraction. And it requires strength because the temptation to interrupt, to correct, to defend is always pressing. To train yourself in true listening, you must practice restraint. When the other person is speaking, your task is not to prepare your counterattack. It is to enter their perspective as if it were your own. That doesn't mean you abandon your position. It means you suspend judgment long enough to understand theirs. One of the most powerful questions you can ask in an argument is, what do you mean by that? This simple question forces clarity. It shows the other person that you are interested in their reasoning. It slows the pace of the conflict, and it often exposes weaknesses in their position that they didn't realize were there. By asking questions and listening intently to the answers, you guide the argument without ever raising your voice. Listening also guards you against arrogance because no matter how intelligent you are, you do not know everything. Sometimes, in listening deeply, you might discover that the other person is partly right or even entirely right. And while that may feel like a loss, it is actually a higher kind of victory. For if the goal of argument is truth, then finding it, even at the cost of your pride, is the real win. The one who listens well is not only more persuasive, but also more teachable. And teachability is the path to wisdom. Now imagine two people in conflict. One is talking over the other, eager to dominate, dismissive of every counterpoint. The other is calm, attentive, nodding, asking questions, showing they are fully engaged. Who looks stronger? Who earns the trust of the audience? Who holds the moral high ground? The answer is obvious. The listener, not the loudest speaker, is the one who commands the room. So to win an argument, resist the urge to dominate with words. Instead, dominate with silence, patience, and presence. Listen so carefully that you understand your opponent's position even better than they do. Because once you can articulate their perspective clearly, you gain the right to challenge it persuasively. People are far more likely to accept your reasoning if they feel you've genuinely understood theirs. In the end, listening is not weakness, it is strategy, it is respect, and it is power. Arguments are not won by those who shout the loudest, but by those who understand the deepest. To listen well is to disarm your opponent, gather the truth, and speak with precision. That is how you move an argument, not by force, but by understanding. When emotions are under control and genuine listening has given you insight, the next crucial step in winning an argument is how you present your ideas. It is not enough to simply have good points. They must be delivered in a way that is logical, clear, and compelling. Because in the heat of debate, confusion is your enemy and structure is your ally. If your words are tangled, no amount of truth will save them. If your reasoning is disciplined, even simple points can feel undeniable. Think of an argument like building a bridge. The goal is to connect your perspective to the other person's understanding. A bridge must be strong, balanced, and carefully designed. If it is built recklessly, it collapses under its own weight. But when built with precision, it becomes the path across which others can safely walk. In the same way, your ideas must be structured so clearly that they naturally guide others from confusion to clarity, from doubt to agreement. So how do you structure an argument effectively? First, you begin with clarity of terms. Many conflicts arise not from true disagreement, but from vague or misunderstood definitions. If you argue about freedom or justice or success without first clarifying what those words mean, you may spend hours in a battle that is not about ideas, but about language. Therefore, discipline yourself to define key terms at the start. Precision in language is the foundation of clarity in thought. Second, order your reasoning. Random points scattered without sequence will weaken your case. But if you organize them like stepping stones, each point naturally leading to the next, you create momentum. Your opponent and any audience listening begins to follow your logic not because you force them, but because you've made the path easy to walk. This is why many of the greatest philosophers and speakers structured their arguments in sequences, premise, evidence, conclusion, not because it's academic, but because it works. Third, support your claims with evidence. Logic without grounding becomes abstract. It floats in the air. But when your reasoning is anchored to real-world examples, analogies, or data, it gains weight. A claim like discipline leads to success may sound like opinion, but when paired with evidence, stories of athletes, thinkers, or even personal experience, it transforms into something undeniable. People rarely yield to raw logic alone. They are persuaded when logic is embodied in lived reality. But structure and clarity go beyond formal logic. They also involve simplicity. The human mind craves order, but rejects unnecessary complexity. If you drown your argument in jargon, if you pile on too many details without focus, you create fog instead of light. Winning an argument is not about showing how much you know. It is about making your point unavoidable. The more straightforward your reasoning, the harder it is to refute. Complexity often disguises weakness. Simplicity reveals strength. Now, some people believe that arguments are won by clever tricks, rhetorical flourishes, or verbal traps. And yes, these can have short-term effects, but they do not produce lasting conviction. Tricks may corner someone temporarily, but they leave behind resentment. True persuasion requires a different kind of discipline, the discipline of thought expressed with clarity. You don't want your opponent to feel humiliated. You want them to walk away thinking, I see what they mean. That subtle shift happens only when your reasoning is transparent, not manipulative. Clarity also demands honesty. Do not exaggerate your points. Do not overstate evidence. Do not pretend certainty where none exists. Intellectual honesty is itself persuasive because it signals confidence. If you can admit where your position has limits or where you could be wrong, you disarm suspicion. People expect debaters to twist facts. When you refuse to do so, you stand out. Your clarity becomes more than a tactic. It becomes a testament to your integrity. Another aspect of structuring ideas is anticipating counter-arguments. Imagine the chess player who thinks not just about their next move, but about the opponent's response. When you present your reasoning, address objections before they are raised. This demonstrates not only mastery of your own perspective, but also respect for the complexity of truth. It shows you have thought deeply enough to consider challenges. By acknowledging and addressing them up front, you close doors before your opponent can even open them. Let's imagine a simple scenario. Suppose you are arguing about whether discipline is more important than talent. If you say discipline matters more, the other person can easily say, but what about natural genius? Instead, you could structure your case like this. Yes, talent has value, but talent without discipline often fails, while discipline without talent still produces results. Therefore, discipline is the more reliable foundation. Notice the difference? By acknowledging talent but subordinating it within your reasoning, you preempt the counterpoint. That is the power of structured clarity. In practice, structuring arguments well requires habits of mind. Read deeply so your thoughts are nourished with knowledge. Write regularly so your ideas learn to take form on the page. Reflect often so your reasoning is not shallow. These disciplines strengthen your ability to think in order, and thinking in order leads naturally to speaking in order. An untrained mind produces scattered speech. A disciplined mind produces clarity. But there is one more secret to structured clarity: silence. Sometimes the most powerful part of an argument is the pause. When you state your point with precision, then stop and let it hang in the air. It settles deeper in the listener's mind. Clarity is not just in words, it is also in rhythm. Speech without space becomes noise. Structured speech punctuated with thoughtful silence becomes music. So to win an argument, never underestimate the power of structure. Master the art of defining terms, ordering points, supporting with evidence, keeping language simple, anticipating counter-arguments, and speaking with rhythm. When you do, your words will not feel like scattered stones thrown in frustration. They will feel like a carefully built bridge, strong enough for others to cross. In the end, clarity is kindness. To argue with clarity is to respect not only the other person, but also the truth itself. For the truth does not need exaggeration or confusion. It only needs to be revealed with precision. And when your reasoning is disciplined and your ideas are structured, the truth becomes undeniable. That is how clarity wins arguments, not through force, but through order. There is a temptation in every argument, the temptation to win at all costs. To score points, to corner the other person, to walk away feeling triumphant while your opponent is left in silence. It is a seductive goal because the ego delights in victory. But here's the paradox. If your only aim is to win, you may lose something far greater, the truth. And truth is the only victory that actually matters. Think carefully about this. What is the point of an argument? Is it merely to dominate another human being, to humiliate them until they retreat? If so, you may win applause for your wit, but you gain nothing of substance. At best, you win a performance. At worst, you harden the other person against you forever. The deeper purpose of argument should be higher, to get closer to reality, to refine your understanding, and to pursue what is true. If truth is not the aim, then the argument is reduced to a childish contest of pride. You consider how fragile victories built on ego really are. You can outshout someone, but you will not change their mind. You can trap them with clever wordplay, but you will not win their respect. You can silence them with aggression, but you will not persuade them. These hollow victories collapse the moment the conversation ends. The other person walks away resentful, not convinced. And resentment breeds resistance, not agreement. But when your aim is truth, the dynamic shifts entirely. You are no longer battling the other person. You are joining them, however reluctantly, in a shared pursuit. Your posture is not, I must crush you, but let's see what is real here. That subtle shift disarms hostility. Even if the other person remains combative, your sincerity radiates through, and sincerity carries weight. People may resist manipulation, but they recognize honesty when they see it. Aiming for truth also makes you intellectually stronger. If your goal is only to win, you will twist facts, exaggerate claims, and ignore flaws in your own reasoning. You will become sloppy because victory, not accuracy, drives you. But if your goal is truth, you must discipline yourself. You must examine your own assumptions, test your arguments, and admit when you are wrong. This honesty refines your thinking and makes your position far more durable. In a sense, even when you lose such an argument, you win because you have gained a clearer picture of reality. This is why some of the wisest people throughout history welcomed strong opponents. They understood that a sharp challenge, rather than being a threat, was an opportunity. If their ideas survived the test, they grew stronger. If their ideas crumbled, they were freed from error. Either way, truth advanced. This attitude requires humility, and humility is rare, but it is also essential. Because arrogance wins applause, humility wins wisdom. Another reason to aim for truth rather than shallow victory is that arguments rarely happen in a vacuum. There is almost always an audience, sometimes literal, sometimes implied. Colleagues are listening, friends are observing. Even the other person's future self, replaying the memory of the exchange, is part of the audience. If you aim for ego-driven victory, the audience may see you as clever but cruel. If you aim for truth, they see you as sincere, thoughtful, and trustworthy. And credibility is more valuable than any single win. Notice how this principle aligns with the earlier points. If you control your emotions, you appear stable. If you listen deeply, you appear respectful. If you structure your reasoning clearly, you appear intelligent. But it is only when you aim for truth that you appear trustworthy. And trustworthiness is the highest ground in any argument. People might resist your ideas for the moment, but they will remember your integrity. They will know that you were not trying to manipulate them, but to uncover something real. That memory lingers, and over time, it persuades more deeply than any clever rebuttal. But there is also a personal dimension here. Ask yourself, do you really want to live in illusions? Do you want to cling to false ideas just because they let you win a few arguments? What kind of life is built on self-deception? A person who seeks only to win is trapped in a hall of mirrors, surrounded by distorted reflections of themselves. A person who seeks truth, even at the cost of temporary defeat, builds their life on rock, not sand. They may stumble, but they stand on something real. This truth-centered mindset also transforms the tone of your arguments. You become less hostile because you are not defending your ego but examining ideas. You become more patient because you are not rushing to score points but taking the time to understand. You become more persuasive because people sense that your words are not games. They carry weight. In short, aiming for truth makes you calmer, more thoughtful, and more credible all at once. Now, does this mean you should never fight hard in argument? Of course not. Truth is not passive. Sometimes you must defend it with firmness, even force. But the difference is in the aim. When you fight for victory, you bend truth to serve your pride. When you fight for truth, you bend your pride to serve reality. One path leads to arrogance and fragility. The other leads to wisdom and strength. So when you enter an argument, ask yourself a simple question. Am I here to prove I'm right? Or am I here to discover what is right? That question will shape everything from your tone to your logic to your outcome. Winning at all costs makes you smaller. Seeking truth, even if it humbles you, makes you larger. And in the long run, truth is undefeated. It may take time, it may be resisted, but it always outlasts falsehood. Therefore, the final secret to winning arguments is paradoxical. Stop trying to win. Aim higher. Aim for truth. Because the person who aims for truth cannot truly lose, and the person who aims only for victory cannot truly win.